Good evening, everyone. There's a lot of new logistics in tonight's event. I hope you can bear with us a bit. But I thought all of you that have probably seen the PDP-1, I hope you've had a great time already. There's really a lot more to come this evening with some really superstars. I'm John Toole. For those of you that don't know, I'm Executive Director and CEO of this institution. And I want to take a few minutes to talk to you a little bit about the museum and what we've done and what we really walked through. I believe tonight really represents another threshold we are crossing in our organizational development. Although I can humbly say that there are probably many more thresholds to go. Through our events, public tours, speaker series, exhibits, Fellows Awards, website, archiving and collecting, we are becoming a significant resource in the Valley, in addition to a community asset and also worldwide. And like the PDP-1 itself, we both seem to be getting better with age. However, tonight we recognize and celebrate a monumental piece of computing history, the history of the DEC PDP-1. To me, it's a night to celebrate many things coming together, unusual in that sense. The physical object actually working, seeing and learning from the spectacular people who are actually making it happen and created it and innovated, and celebrating with the terrific volunteers and staff who brought it together to make it available to the world. I'm very proud of them all. DEC has a special place in computing history's heart, I believe, and just as thousands of points really on the timeline of computing history that we ultimately want to explore in our museum in our future. After tonight, I hope we can think of what it was like 50 years ago, how computing was like back then, and just see the excitement and challenges of those days. That's what you'll see, that insight tonight. The museum's ongoing restoration efforts are clearly an important part of our mission. We clearly have done an IBM 1620 years ago, and I hope many of you have seen that in operation and the wonderful people that helped that to reality. And why do we undertake a restoration? We do so for really three non-trivial reasons. One, we do them to recover lost knowledge. Second, we do them in order to better share the history of a computer and the world around it at the time. And third, we do them to build learning communities and have lots of fun along the way. I think these are pretty good reasons, don't you? Thank you. Now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce the talented PDP-1 restoration team for this really monumental restoration undertaking that is sitting here tonight, two of whom will be on stage. Will the people on the restoration team please stand? And let's give this group a particularly big hand. And all the people that have contributed anything, really belong and deserve it. Put the exhibit together. Thanks, everyone. I also want to acknowledge that this isn't the only restoration we've been involved with right now. And we have with us tonight an IBM 1401 restoration project. And they're sitting. Let's give them a big hand for the things they're doing. Frankly, they've got a little bit more work to do. So look forward to, 8 months, a year? What did they tell me? Well, we're proud of them. And talk to these folks if you want to join the team. Associated with the restoration itself, we are launching a terrific website on June 1st in support of the PDP-1 team's effort. So when you go to computinghistory.org/PDP-1, you'll find lots of great content on the history of the restoration team, historical information about the PDP-1 from a product perspective, as well as over 150 special materials, documents, photos, software, and other oral histories. And I know you'll enjoy watching this and listening to this. And as a special treat, we also will have a great feature article on the PDP-1 restoration effort, recently written by Mike Chaponis, the team leader, titled Restoring the DEC PDP-1. Very original title, Mike. That will appear in our new spring issue of Core, the museum's magazine for members. While the print version is right now, as we speak, in the printer, you can find this on our website with the latest online version of Core. So please check it out today. And there's lots and lots of online content available on our website. And we'll be redesigning our website shortly through the next several months, through the summer. So I hope you can see that the museum is really growing in both quality, depth, interpretation, and exhibition. This is really important to us and important to me and the staff, the trustees, and hopefully you, really our customers, in terms of what we are providing. On the financial side, we've also been working very hard with some very special and very generous donors. You probably know our largest gift to date has been $15 million from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This has been adding momentum to our efforts to complete the timeline of computing history, which will look in the computer revolution and its impact on the human experience by fall 2009. Now, while that sounds like a long time, there's all kinds of wonderful things you're going to see between then and now, such as the PDP-1 being unveiled. And finally, as we near the end of our fiscal development campaign efforts in fiscal 2006, we thank you and your companies for the strong support and generous past contributions that they have made to us. And as individuals, we ask you tonight to please give us some thought, okay, whether or not you would be able to help donate in order to continue our important work here in the Valley. And I want to accomplish two objectives in the next person I want to introduce, Gary Malone, our Director of Development. One, I want to bring to you the people on our staff and the kind of work that they do. And Gary can give you a real quick update on our latest plans for the end of our fiscal year. Gary?
Thank you, John. Good evening. My name is Gary Malone, and I am the Director of Development here at the Computer History Museum. I have a very simple task this evening. I'm here to ask for your support as we close out our fiscal year, which concludes on June 30th. We are currently in the middle of a comprehensive $125 million campaign to raise money to complete the vision for the museum. As part of this effort, we are raising funds to modify the building and construct our exhibits. We are also raising money for an endowment, which will provide support that will allow the museum to continue to operate well into the future. And finally, each year, we raise money for the annual operations of the museum. Annual fund dollars go to support our docent-led tours, our popular speaker series, special events, collection and preservation efforts, and as some of you have already witnessed, and others will witness later on tonight, our exciting restoration program. We simply could not accomplish these things without your support. That's why I'm here today, to encourage you to become members of the museum by making a financial commitment to our annual fund. If you are already a member, I want to ask you to renew your gift by June 30th. As an added bonus, contributions that we receive before June 30th will help us to secure a special community match set up by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. At this point, I want to make a special plea to potential corporate supporters. There are many ways that you can partner with the museum. Next year, we will roll out our education program, which is designed to encourage the next generation of innovators, technologists, and engineers. In essence, to nurture the young minds and talent we need to keep our corporations at the vanguard of innovation and success. So an investment in us can also be an investment in your company's future success as well. If you would like to find out more about individual memberships or ways that you can help as a corporate partner, I encourage you to stop by the table outside the auditorium tonight to learn more about becoming a valuable supporter. Thank you very much for your time, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Gary. This is really important to sustaining our future, and I hope you will all be part of it. And his information table will be outside. And by the way, visible storage, for those of you that have not seen visible storage and or the PDP-1 demonstration, will be open to the public after the lecture tonight. This is the change in logistics until 10 p.m. So treat yourself to a stroll if you haven't had a chance to see visible storage and then see the PDP-1 demonstration. Now I'd like to announce two winning members in our drawing tonight for the chance to play Space War at a future date with two of our PDP-1 gurus, Steve Slug Russell and Peter Sampson. Now, this is a special deal, okay, for members, I believe it was. And Pam, you know, you can trust Pam. You can really trust Pam.
I didn't even look at him.
So the first one to play with Slug Russell is Mark Howard. Mark here? Mark, okay, Mark, wonderful. All right. So come see Pam, please, and the person to play with Peter is Bill Norberg? Norbug? N-O-V-O-R. Vorberg. V-O-R-B-U-G. Okay, well, we have his email address, so we'll send him an email. Through the PDP-1, of course. Now it's time for our main event. Now I've got the honor to introduce Ed Fredkin, but first there's a short video that we want to show that'll kind of lead things off, and then I'll introduce Ed following that. Doug?
It's a privilege to be able to work on these artifacts, and I think that all of us on the project feel that way. This machine was designed in 1959, for example. This particular one built a few years later, but nonetheless, it represents this sort of piece of computing history that you just don't see anywhere else. In fact, this PDP-1 that we're working on here is, we believe, the only working PDP-1 in the world. There it is. We did it. The museum's first rule is that each piece is an artifact. That implies an awful lot. That means that we're not just supposed to be service guys who come in here, find all the bad parts, replace them, put in the new ones, and get going as fast as possible because the customer's losing money. No, we're here to understand that this is an artifact. So every piece that we've taken out of this machine, we've dated, tagged, and have available. We have a complete history of everything we took it out, when we took it out, why we took it out, and in the case where we've added wires or something, those are all marked, or changed components. Everything is marked. So there's a certain level of care that's involved in doing this that's not the same as you would do to just get it running. So
we have probably gotten some gray hairs trying to figure out, you know, how these designers, you know, 20 or 30 or 40 years ago designed these machines. You know, how does this circuit work, or how does this piece of logic work? And you know, that's kind of like solving puzzles.
We'd like to come up with a procedure for other projects and also potentially for other smaller museums on how they might go about doing restoration of their machines. So we have fairly large plans.
We've talked among ourselves occasionally that it would be really cool to see these machines running 20 years from now, 25, maybe 50 years from now, still in a somewhat functional state, and for the benefit of those people who will be around then to be able to see this stuff.
Many technological things. You get a much better sense of what they were like if you can see them in operation. When you can see it work, you can hear the typewriter type, and it makes distinctive noises, and you can see how slow it was, and you can enjoy watching the paper tape flap and things like that. And I think it gives you a much better idea of what was going on.
Seeing these card readers read at 800 cards a minute, seeing this line printer print at 600 lines a minute, seeing these punch cards and lights flash and wow, and key punches punch, you just haven't been there until you've seen this. I mean, it's just not the same as sitting in front of your PC and, looking in your browser. It's not the same at all. And I think that experience is part of what the museum can do that no other place can do.
Passionate people. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me now introduce Ed Fredkin. Real honor to have Ed here tonight. Ed is recognized worldwide as one of the foremost authorities and developers in the field of artificial intelligence. He is now a distinguished career professor at Carnegie Mellon University West and has kindly agreed to serve as moderator for tonight's panel. Ed joined BB&N in the early 1960s, where he wrote a PDP-1 assembler called FRAP and participated in early projects using the PDP-1 computer. He founded his first company, Information International, Incorporated in 1961. Ed has always been broadly interested in both hardware and software aspects of computation. He is the inventor of many, many things and has also been involved in a major way in computer vision, chess, and other areas of artificial intelligence research. His 5-decade career in computer science and his early use of the DEC PDP-1 computer make him uniquely qualified and interesting for tonight's panel. Ed, please join.
Okay. I'm about to introduce the panel, but before I do, I just want to say one thing. The appearance of this computer, the PDP-1, was a really startling thing, and it's hard to explain. I've tried to come up with a kind of analogy. It's as though you went to some show, and there was a little company you never heard of, and they had this machine. They were selling it for $100. Instead of running a few billion instructions a second, it ran 1 trillion instructions a second, and had some kind of holographic color display, 3D or whatnot. I mean, so the PDP-1, when it appeared, was completely out of, if you plot a graph, of the progress of computers, it was just off the screen, that's all. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is to introduce the panel. First, I'd introduce Harlan Anderson. Harlan was one of the guys that created Digital Equipment Corporation. He and Ken Olsen together were like partners, and so he was a key player in creating both the company and the PDP-1. I think you probably wrote the first program for the PDP-1, maybe? No? Okay, well, that was one rumor I heard. Okay, part of the story is Lincoln Labs and digital, where all of this came from. Steve Russell is also on the panel. Slug, I guess, was a nickname. Steve was a key guy in many, many things. He was not a student at MIT, but he was there working on things, and he graduated to Stanford and when John McCarthy went there, and also was a key player in creating some of the future for all of us. I remember one day we had a little group at my house, and Steve cornered me and said he had this idea, and he described space war to me. He thought it through pretty carefully, and he programmed it up, and that was a real first, I think the first video game ever. And Peter Sampson. Now,
as I mentioned some of these names, I just want to say one thing. They have in common, a number of them, which is a thing called TMRC. TMRC probably means nothing to you, but it stood for the Tech Model Railroad Club. Now, you can imagine if MIT has a model railroad, it's not your ordinary model railroad. And a lot of people, when they saw a computer that maybe they could play with, their brain went click, this could run the trains in the model railroad club. Okay, and so the same kind of thinking resulted in most of the hackers who really created a lot of the future there were members of the Tech Model Railroad Club. And certainly Peter Sampson was one of those. And so, you know, he had a career later at Digital. And, you know, I really want to focus on what happened long ago as opposed to what happened afterwards. So Alan Kotak was a student at MIT. We have John McCarthy here on the panel also, and John McCarthy had figured out, you know, it was time one could make a chess program, and one of the students, Kotak. And by the way, as we remember these events, one of the fun things that's going on is when you remember events from, we're talking about the late 50s, you don't always get them right. We had, what? Yes, indeed, right. And so I may have some of them wrong. But what we decided is when this panel gets together, anything we agree upon, that must be the accurate thing. We'll document it. Okay. So Kotak wrote the world's first chess program, to my knowledge. A German fellow named Konrad Zuse had the idea of one, and Claude Shannon also had that idea later. And Kotak actually implemented a chess program. Okay, and again, I may be corrected on everything I'm saying here. Okay, we have John McCarthy here, who the best way I think about John is I'm a guy who thinks of lots of ideas, and I discovered right away a good thing to do with these ideas was to mention them to John, who's a good critic. But his reply almost always was, yes, I've had that idea. And it was true, of course. So one of the most important things that we're going to talk about is that the PDP-1 was used to illustrate the advantage of the kind of computing everyone does today, which is interactive computing, where the computer is able to do more than one thing at a time, or, you know, could deal with more than one person, and so on. And the question, in the era of computers costing many millions of dollars, and, you know, if you put inflation into this, we have to talk about many tens of millions of dollars each. There was no possibility of having that interactive process with a computer, you know, that's worth thousands of dollars an hour. So, but John McCarthy saw this future and figured out a way to make it happen sooner, which was called time sharing. The idea was a number of people using computers at the same time. And the PDP-1 played quite a role in bringing that whole concept to reality. Have I got everybody on the panel? Yeah. Gordon Bell. Okay. So I have to tell one Gordon Bell anecdote, which is that when I got to BBN, I found this person there. Well, he hired me, a guy named Licklider, and I always had lots of ideas, but the difference was when I would tell Licklider one of my ideas, he'd say, okay, let's do it, or something. So, and BBN found the money in one way or another. So after I came, I got BBN to hire both John McCarthy and Marv Minsky as consultants. And I was told, you know, to find more computer people. And so I interviewed some guy, and, I went to Licklider and said, hey, I interviewed a guy, and, he wants to be a computer architect, and I think we should hire him. And Licklider, he says, is he the best computer architect in the world? I was sort of taken aback, because I said, well, he hasn't designed a computer yet, so it's hard to tell. So Licklider said, who are the best? I remember I told him 3 names, one of which was the designer of the PDP-1, Ben Gurley. Another was John Koch. And the third was Wesley Clark, who'd done the TX2 computer at Lincoln Labs. So Licklider said, go hire one of them instead. Well, of course, I tried to hire them, but none of them would go to BBN because it wasn't, they weren't anything in computers. And so Gordon Bell, whom I had to say sorry to, went to digital instead. Okay, so I'm probably the only person in the world who interviewed Gordon and didn't hire him. Okay. Okay, so I think that's... Yeah, why don't you do that? Yes, okay.
Then we can bring the panel up afterwards.
Good idea.
How's that?
Hi, I'm glad to be here with all of you today. This is my first memory of the PDP-1 and DEC. As I arrived in June of 1960, I got to DEC by being a user of the DEC system modules, because I was at MIT doing a design of a tape controller for the TX0, and so I came out there to buy modules for my tape control design, and then basically obviously stayed. I got to DEC from MIT. I was at MIT starting down the research path to get a PhD, because I really didn't want to go to work. I didn't see any companies that I liked I wanted to work for. And so when I came to DEC, there were only 80 engineers, 80 people. My badge number, or 79, my badge number was 80. And I loved immediately what I saw. They were in the old mill on 4 floors of Building 12, was Building 12. And what I liked about it was there weren't that many engineers, and basically 1 or 2 engineers could actually go and design a computer, which to me was the right kind of ratio, as opposed to the companies that I was used to, where I learned as a co-op student, where you had seas of desks and seas of engineers, and my job was to design maybe 1 amplifier or the likes. My first project was to work on, I think, the multiplier, divider, and the interrupt system for the PDP-1, which the PDP-1 prototype, which we have here. The PDP-1 prototype isn't, as we have here, isn't quite complete. It was 3 bays, which you can kind of see here in this sort of, what we call this sort of bathroom speckled brown here. It had system modules. The memory system was here, and these were the various system modules that were made. There were 25 to a rack, and then these 4 here are the memory. And one of my first tasks was to make to work on the prototype, and this first memory had 2 potentiometers here, and it really was a bear to get it to work, because you had so many variables to make to tune up. Ben Gurley had designed this, and Ben was an absolutely wonderful designer, and one of these what Carver Mead calls the tall, thin men. Worked equally well at the circuit level, designed all the circuitry for the display, and was very much interested in programming and all the operating systems and compilers. and the whole schmear from electrons up. And I have to say, the thing that attracted me was Harlan Anderson and Ken Olson and Ben Gurley, Dick Best, all of the guys that we worked with at DEC. It was an absolutely great period of my life and joy.
That's our Gordon Bell. Ed, may I join you and the panelists on the stage? If all the panelists will come up, then I'll turn it over to Ed and to lead the panel any way he sees fit.
Why don't you just get another chair?
Yeah, we can do that. We're getting there.
Just get another chair.
I ain't gonna say anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
At one point, the reason you saw Gordon Bell in the video is he's in Australia. Just a minor. Hello? Dad. Okay, fine. John's fine. What I thought we would do is think about this chronologically. So the question is, why did the PDP-1 occur? And that has to do with a number of issues which Harlan Anderson is probably more aware of than anyone else, since Harlan was at Lincoln Labs, where Ben Gurley was, Ken Olson was, and where they developed the TX0 and TX2, which were, the TX2 was probably the most advanced computer in the world at that time, and they pioneered in many things. Implemented the first core memory, which was the first practical large random access memory, and so on. So, Harlan, why don't you say? Thanks.
Well, I guess I'm the one person on the panel who was. I'm Harlan Anderson. This is John McCarthy.
They have that right, yes. Okay.
I was the one person who was present at the conception, gestation, and the birth of the PDP-1 on the panel tonight. So, it's going to be hard to challenge anything specific because I'm the only one who was there.
We'll try.
But I would like to challenge Ed on something. He offered me the chance to say I was the first programmer for the PDP-1 program. That's not true, but I had another distinction. That was selling the first PDP-1 computer to Ed Fredkin. I'm sure he remembers that, and we'll probably talk a little bit about that later. I've been around a long time. I didn't exactly take my first programming course from Babbage, but it wasn't far. It was from Professor David Wheeler, who was one of your speakers here in recent years, and he's at Cambridge University in England. And he was a visiting professor at the University of Illinois, where I was a student when they were trying to make the first ILIAC and ORDVAC computers. And in contrast to the way these MIT upstarts later, the students were able to get on a computer, they never left the students at Illinois use the computer because it was for a military project and it was one of those big expensive ones. So the programs that I wrote as a student at Illinois never got run. except by the poor professor who had to pretend like he was the computer, take my homework home and see if it would work. And that was a challenge for him, but not for me. Lincoln Lab, we can't do this thing, as Ed said, without talking a little bit about Lincoln Lab. I was recruited to go there in 1951, and I actually stayed at Illinois one more year and finally went there at 52. Ken Olson was my first boss, and what my first assignment was to design the control logic for a new computer that was being built on a crash basis for the sole purpose of testing the new magnetic core memory that Jay Forrester had invented. And we did that in very quick time. There were some problems with testing a new memory because you can't put your program in the memory because you don't know whether the memory is going to work. So and Wes Clark came into the rescue on writing the first program for that computer. And it was kind of the collegial atmosphere that everybody worked on everybody's project, and it was a very wonderful place to work. So Wes Clark's solution to that problem that I just alluded to was to write a very, very small program that was loaded into the computer with toggle switches because you couldn't load it into the memory because the memory didn't work yet. So we did that, and so the program was maybe 10 instructions in total in machine language, and the name of the program was the inchworm. And the idea was the program picked itself up from one small portion of this new unproven memory and move it to another one, move itself to another one, keep moving through the memory. If it made it to the end, you decided the memory worked. And that was the first test of it. Well, we, in later years at Lincoln Lab, Ken and I had gone in different areas of the laboratory work, although we had started out together and we'd retained a close friendship. And he had been invited to be a chief engineer at a new company, not Digital Equipment Corporation. And that company never came to pass, although they attempted to start it with some other people. And he had recruited me as an engineer there. And so I didn't get a job as an engineer because he didn't get a job as a chief engineer, and the company never existed. But we talked about it and said, well, maybe we could do it on our own without the larger group that had extremely ambitious plans, not in the computer area, but the component area. So that was in April of 1957, and it was the beginning of the start of Digital Equipment Corporation. And I have to tell you that the name of the company at that point, when we were trying to raise money, was not Digital Equipment Corporation. It was Digital Computer Corporation. And we went to the people who who we sought out for venture capital, and there wasn't any venture capital like you know about it today, because there was very, very few sources. There were angels, if you were lucky enough to know one of the Rockefellers, and a few other families that individuals would sometimes support companies, but we didn't know any of those individuals. So we went to the Small Business Administration office in Boston and said, what do we do? So they said, well, there are 3 companies that you can't approach as an individual, and they told us the name of 3. And one of them was in Boston, American Research and Development Corporation, which we sought out with a letter that came in over the transom. We didn't know anybody there either. We didn't know anybody who was in the business world because we were engineers at MIT Lincoln Lab. The other 2 names they gave us were in New York. And we weren't about to spend money going to New York to look for venture capital, so we went to American Research in Boston. And we prepared a proposal which, now you have to remember this was before copy machines existed. Not only computers were very expensive and somewhat rare and certainly weren't accessible to individuals as toys. So we prepared the proposal, and I have a copy of I've donated copies of these original proposals to the museum, and I think if we can put a slide up here now, is my slide man in attendance? These were the proposals. Now, the reason it's white print on black, well, that drew attention, but it was also a convenience. We had no way to copy these other than with a blueprint copying machine, which would look awful. So we did it photographically and just took a piece of printed photo paper and laid the thing on it, and of course it came out as a negative. So we did that. And there was no software for the computer, obviously, because the computer nor the company existed. But these were the first two proposals. Notice the name is Digital Computer Corporation on both of them. The second one was prepared, the larger one at the top, was prepared particularly for the potential investment group. Now, at that time period, RCA and General Electric had both entered and failed in the computer business. So it was kind of hard for them to swallow the story that there was a possibility that two engineers could make a success of this thing. And the deal that they offered us, well, I have to say one other thing, and that is the era here, 1957, transistors were just moving from small radios, handheld radios, to some other forms of electronics, but they certainly weren't widely used in computers. So that was one of the things we had to offer based on the TX0 and the TX2 experience. So we sought out the only source we knew, and we said we needed $100,000 to start the company. And they said, we'll give you 70. But if at the end of the first year, if you're doing well, we'll loan you 30 without diluting you. That was part of the deal. The other part of the deal was they thought we must have a businessman as part of the operation. So they said, we, American Research, for our $70,000 are going to take 70% of the equity. Those of you who have been involved in these kind of things know that it's a different era. We were naive, didn't negotiate. We said, okay. And they said, you two can have 20% of the equity, and that leaves 10 left over. That was reserved for a businessman that they insisted we had to find. Well, we never found the businessman. We interviewed some people. We even offered the job to one businessman, the only businessman that we knew who was working in part of the business office at MIT, and he turned us down. So they also told us one other thing. We had to change the name. It couldn't be Digital Computer Corporation. So we changed it to Digital Equipment Corporation. And we had to start with some product other than computers. So that's how we did building blocks. We did printed circuit boards and system modules, which are the heart of the PDP-1 that you saw earlier tonight. So we did that for the first year, and we made a profit. At the end of the first year, we were a very small company. And that allowed us the boldness, if you want to put it that way. We never asked permission. We hired Ben Gurley, and we made our first computer. There's one more quick sidetrack that I'm going to take here, and then I'll try to wind this up so we give time to the other panelists to tell their part of the story. We hired lots of Lincoln engineers, by the way, and the question was, how long should the word length of the computer be? And you know, lots of scientific studies and all kinds of things go into that, and it was a big deal when the PCs went from lengthened the word length and all that. We were manufacturing memory testers for the memory portion of the computer industry to test these magnetic core memories. And one of the manufacturers of memories was RCA, another breakaway group from MIT. And they had a surplus memory that was 18 bits that was available cheap. So the only other thing I'd like to, there are two other things I'd like to say here. One is that getting the first PDP-1 working, and I have to take my hats off to these fellows in the front row for what they did and what you saw earlier. Making the first one working to be shown at the Eastern Joint Computer Conference on December 1, 1959 was a real challenge. And the night before this trade show was supposed to open, yours truly and Ben Gurley were there late into the night. And I called my wife finally at 1:30 and said, I don't think I'm coming home tonight because this thing still isn't working and the trade show opens in the morning. Well, that's part of the story. Her part of the story, which she tells still, is that she had just given birth to our third child, so we had three children under the age of 5, and they were all sick. And she had just got them quieted down and to sleep when I called at 1:30 to tell her I wasn't coming home. That was a lead balloon. So the other thing that I'd like to say is I want to thank the MIT people who were here on the panel tonight, because we sold this computer with virtually no software. And they developed the software that that we used at trade shows to demonstrate. We demonstrated PDP-1 as if it were a useful thing for somebody who was willing to spend $120,000. But we did sell a lot of the computers, not a lot by today's quantity standards, but enough to keep us going nicely. And we want to thank the MIT people. There's one other group that I really want to thank, and that's all the restoration people in the front row. I want to thank them again because what they did was heroic. I have one more thing, and then I'll be done here. Getting ready to come out here, I looked at my memorabilia stuff, papers and old manuals, and looking around, and I found that I had forgotten that when I left the company many years ago as a going-away gift, they gave me a PDP-1. Kind of. I'll explain that in a moment. So I got my PDP-1 out, and I turned the power on, and it worked just like the day that they gave it to me. And I don't see what all this restoration stuff is about. We made good computers. Now I'm going to show you that computer. Whoops, here it is. It turns out it's just the console, and Ken Olsen had made a lampshade for it, and it's a lamp. So I turned the power on, and the lamp worked just like it did the day I got it. And that's all I really have to say other than to try and participate with the panel and answer questions.
I'd like to actually designate myself as the next speaker for a little bit here, because my story starts exactly where Harlan's ends there. Of course, he wasn't done with the PDP-1 yet, but I went the next morning to that same computer show, and I saw the PDP-1 there. There was one thing about it, though, that it would run for a while and then stop. You know, and Ben Gurley was there, and he was a bit perplexed, and he'd fiddle with it, start it over again, and then it would run fine for maybe 10 minutes, then it would stop. So I talked to him about it, and I got all excited and so on. Then I walked away, and as I'm walking away, I pass, a couple booths down. I see a tape drive on display. And in those days, magnetic tape drives had very big, powerful motors, and the reels would go woof like this and stop, and they'd have maybe multiple horsepower motors on each reel. And then I noticed something that, the salesman is saying, oh, this great new tape drive, blah, blah, blah. You want to see it run? He turned it on, and the motor would go woof, and I noticed the PDP-1 stopped running. So, being kind of intellectually curious, I started looking around, and I saw that there was a ground strap, sort of one of those braids like that you can put wires into, but made flat, and there was a wire from that to the tape drive. So I'm following this along to see where they grounded it, and it went down, 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 connected to the PDP-1. It turned out that both had asked for a ground strap, and someone just produced one, gave one end to one person and one to the other. So that was the first time I fixed something on the PDP-1. So once I saw what this machine was, I could hardly believe it, because, it was a bit like, just hard to imagine the difference. It had a built-in display. It was running software. It was extremely fast. I mean, the computer we had at BBN ran 60 instructions a second. And, the architecture, it had a 31-bit word, not exactly. That's because they only had 5 bits for the counter, and they had to have 1 bit, since it had a drum memory that they knew was either a 1 or a 0. And, this one ran 100,000 instructions a second. That's quite a difference. And, it had this display which didn't exist anywhere. So I had to have it. So no two ways about it. So I went back to Licklider and said, you've got to see this machine. We've got to buy it. It was $85,000 for the machine with 1,000 18-bit words of memory. Okay. They never sold one of those that size because by then they could make a 4,000 word memory, and that was $120,000. So we ended up getting one, and I just want to tell you, I'll take a couple minutes more and tell you a little bit about ordering this computer. You can contrast it to when you buy a computer today. Okay. You know, there was this machine, and we were going to get one, and we would borrow the prototype and so on. Then I'd said, you know, I met with Ben Gurley a number of times, and we got to be friends, and I'd say, you know, it really needs another instruction that does such and such. He says, that sounds good, okay, you know. And so then I'd say, you know, I don't like this Flexo writer, and there's a Soroban electric typewriter that's better. And, okay, but he says, what kind of character set? I said, okay, I'll design the character set and assign the codes to it. There wasn't ASCII yet. And so I had to do that. And then I didn't like the I.O. system, so I said, listen, I have an idea for a different I.O. system, and I designed that. He said, well, we could make that an option. Yeah, you can have that. And this, this just went on and on. I decided I wanted to be able to do experiments, so I wanted A to D input and output, analog input and analog output. Okay. And I wanted 18 relays so I could turn things on and off. And it was like being in, you know, Christmas and having a free coupon for anything you wanted. And so it was really fantastic. Also, I have to just say that just as a coincidence, I was at Lincoln Labs too. I was a pilot in the Air Force, and I was assigned to Lincoln Laboratories, and the Air Force somehow forgot about me. So for over a year and a half, I worked at Lincoln doing anything I thought made sense, and I was paid by the Air Force. And when they found out that no one knew what I was doing for all that time, it bothered them. That's an understatement. Okay, so what happened next is that, you know, BBN got its PDP-1. John McCarthy and Marv Minsky did interesting things with it, and they gave one to MIT, and this is where our story is about to connect with more members of this panel. So what happened is that MIT had gotten the TX0, which of course was of great interest to Merck people, the Tech Model Railroad Club, and then it got the PDP-1. I think it was the number 2 machine made after BBN.
It was quite a bit later.
Number 3?
September of 61.
Number 5? Okay. I guess, okay, number 5. See, this is the value of the panel here. You know, that was another big event because the MIT guys, as you'll hear, had all kinds of ideas and did all kinds of things. So I don't know who we ought to start with. Maybe, okay, Alan Kotak.
Thank you. So as was mentioned, the three of us to the left here, we're all members of the Tech Model Railroad Club, which you should know continues to operate a model railroad at MIT. And at the time it was a home for people who were interested in computers. This is back in I showed up in 1958. And there was this guy named Jack Dennis who played an important role in the development of the PDP-1 and culture at MIT. He was a graduate student at the time and a member of the Model Railroad Club since, I don't know, the early 1950s. And he introduced this TX0 computer to us, which had, as was said, come from Lincoln Lab, and told us, ran some courses on programming it, and it sat in what's called Building 26 at MIT, and it wasn't heavily used, and so somehow or other, us undergraduate students, freshmen, sophomores, got to actually sign up for time. So they had a sign-up sheet, and you could
block out an hour and put yourself in. We had to choose the least popular hours, but some other names, people you should know, are Bob Saunders, Bob Wagner, and David Gross, who were also Model Railroad Club people who started in 1959 to use a computer in a way that hadn't been done before, which was as a personal tool, not the batch processing system, which I think Steve's going to allude to later here. So, as was said, in 1961, Digital donated a computer to the same lab that we were in, and Jack Dennis was the person who ran the lab, and it was installed next door to the TX0, and he hired a few of us as student support staff, so to speak. I specifically remember getting paid $1.75 an hour for doing software. Of course, the term software hadn't been invented either. We just did programming. There have been some numbers bounced around here, and I thought I'd tell you a few more numbers about the PDP-1. And I see most of the audience here is, I would say, a little on in years. So maybe you remember these computers, but I was talking about this with my daughter, who's 26, over dinner that I was coming to give this talk, and she said, "Well, how does the PDP-1 compare with the machines today?" And so I sort of came up with some numbers off the top of my head, and then I did a little bit more arithmetic, and then I think I corrected my arithmetic, but I said, well, I have this laptop, a Mac G4 laptop, and the PDP-1 ran 1/10,000th the speed of that machine. It had 100,000th of the RAM. It had 1/2 millionth the disk, or as it was in those days, a drum space. It took 2,000 times the volume of space of the laptop. Essentially, you saw it there, filling a good part of a room, and it cost 100 times as much. And if someone today offered you that computer to do something with, you presume that, well, what could you possibly do with a machine of that sort? But that was the only machine we had, and we didn't know any better that it took, megaflops, gigaflops, or what have you, of computing to do anything interesting. So we thought we could do interesting things with this machine. The question of software, or as we call them, programs, the PDP-1 didn't come with much. I mean, it came with this assembler that Ed had written, which is called FRAP. I think that was the Fredkin's assembler program. No, it actually had
that was a rumor. No, in trying to. Digital asked me, would I write the assembler so it ran in the small model, which they never produced, which was a model that had 1,024 18-bit words. Well, to make a symbolic assembly program, they wanted a linking loader to go with it, to fit into that. I discovered every time you had a rule, you had to have some code that made the rule. So I had this great insight, like how long should a symbol be? And by the way, in those days, every assembler had belonged to an IBM card, and for instance, the name was 6 characters long or less. It could be 2 characters, but it couldn't be more than 6. So I just found a style of programming where I said no rules. So I made the symbols variable length and discovered I could use less code that way, and so on and so forth. So I came up with free of rules assembly program. So that was where that came from.
Learn something every day. I think there may have been some math library routines that came out of EBN. There was this compiler called Decal, which well, the MIT crew actually didn't think very highly of any of these things, I'm sorry to say. Because on the TX0 we had what we liked in the way of assemblers and debugging programs and so forth and so on. So we sort of complained somewhat bitterly to Jack Dennis that we didn't really like this software. And so he kept saying, well, we can't rewrite all this stuff, it came and you ought to use it. But, in the first month or two, there was just a lot of friction. So a group of us, anecdote, quote, a group of us decided to challenge ourselves and Jack Dennis and said, we'd like to rewrite the assembler program, and I'll tell you what, since you don't want us to take a long time, we're going to do this in a weekend. And so he said, well, I don't think you can. And he said, well, we said, you only have to pay us if we actually complete it, and it has to work well enough to assemble itself on Monday morning when you come in. So we actually had a number of people here, Peter and I don't think Steve was involved with that, but Bob Wagner, Steve Piner, Bob Saunders, I believe, and maybe others. And we took the TX0 assembler, which we knew very well, and we tore the printout pages into sheets, and we said, here's a subroutine, you rewrite this subroutine. The rules are don't change anything except the instructions, the detail instruction set. And here's the subroutine calling conventions and what have you. And sure enough, on Monday morning, this started Friday evening. On Monday morning, we had the assembler assembling itself. So we thought that was some sort of record for quick software development. So that was our first effort. We also had a program that was descended, an online debugging program that was descended from a program that was known as FLIT, a insecticide of the era. And it was also translated for the PDP-1 and eventually became known as DDT, which the original acronym, if maybe Peter will correct me, but I think it was DEC debugging tape. That's the acronym. The other thing we discovered was that preparing programs on flexowriters, which was these standalone paper tape reader punch typewriter machines, which are giant, really monster machines, was very slow and tedious. And to make corrections, you had to repunch your tape and stop and edit, and a lot of scissors work got done. And with this sort of mode of signing up for time on a computer and using it, and you need to make corrections, you didn't want to run off into the other room and do this. And so doing some online editing of your program seemed like a good idea. And besides that, the paper tape reader on the TX0 ran, I don't know, some 400 characters a second, 300 or something, and the punch ran at 60, and that was all, quite a bit faster than the flexowriters. And so one of our gang put together a program which we called Expensive Typewriter, because in those days the thought of using a $120,000 computer to replace what was a typewriter was very radical, but it actually, it made us all much more productive, because now we could use the computer to do what today would be called word processing, or that term of course hadn't been invented, but maybe we invented it sort of by and by. Another thing was that I was just looking out at the exhibits here of the Fredkin calculators. At the time, one of my classmates, Bob Wagner, and I were both taking a numerical analysis course at MIT, and the homework assignments, you had to actually do these numerical solutions. And the calculators, well, first of all, they were way off on the other side of campus. They had a room with them, and they were always hard to get to use. So in the expensive typewriter genre, Bob wrote Expensive Desk Calculator, which was sort of the first, I guess I would call it, interactive calculation program. So the last story I'd like to tell is that it revolves around, it starts around the fact that, as was mentioned, I had been working, and it wasn't just me, it was a group of students on a chess program for the IBM 7090 that John McCarthy had certainly, he was our mentor and faculty advisor and had done the groundwork for, so I try not to take too much credit for this. But in the process, we were thinking about interesting hacks we could do with the PDP-1, and one of them was we decided to try to establish a network, such as it was, with the TX0. So we ran, as I recall, coax cables between some signaling bit on the PDP-1 and a similar connection to the TX0, and we basically sent teletype code over this link, and so that enabled a fairly elaborate hack, which was that we got a group of our friends who were pretty good at chess to set themselves up in the TX0 room and then recruited some people to come into the PDP-1 room, where I said, I've been working on chess, and we've got this great new chess program from BB&N or somewhere, and some of the details are a little lost in history. But at lunch today, we were talking with John McCarthy, who was certainly one of the people who got pulled into this, but I guess the first version of the program didn't buffer the typing, so the speed of typing was evident from the other room, and he became suspicious of this. And but eventually we put in line buffering in the TypeScript, and I remember finding a grad student I knew who was coming down the hall and said, "Oh, look at this program," and the game went pretty well for a while in that case, but at one point the board positions in the two rooms somehow fell out of sync, and so I was the person in the typewriter in the PDP-1, and I said, error or something. I hoped that this would clue these people in, but an argument ensued, and pretty soon this guy sort of said, "What's that wire running into the?" And so I said, "Run for it." And so he was going in the other room as they were running out the door. So that was the history of PDP-1 chess. And, with that, I will turn the floor over.
And Steve, you want to go next?
Okay. Well, I had the same sort of experience that Ed had when he saw PDP-1 for the first time, because here these guys had a system where you could just sit down and type and see exactly what your program was doing or had done to itself right now. And what I was used to was that program's for the 704, where you prepared a deck of cards, and with luck it all got into the computer correctly. And
yeah,
not my department.
That one did. It's okay, try that.
Okay? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. So anyway, I was used to big decks of cards and long waits, like if you were lucky, only 4 or 5 hours, and if things were more normal, maybe a day. And you tried to juggle two things at once, but it was pretty bad. And either you'd get some output that you expected, which is, as usual, rare, or you'd get, your program would crash, in which case you'd be rewarded with a pile of paper this thick, which had all of the contents of memory in octal. And so you'd expect to spend at least a couple of hours decoding what was there, sort of, and looking in your assembly listing and figuring out what had gone wrong. And here, on the PDP-1, you could just read in your tape, assemble it, which took maybe 5 minutes or so, and then run it, and you could see you could stop it and run and breakpoints, and everything was done in terms of the symbols that you had written. And so it was just like night and day. And I thought this was a great thing, and I wanted to play with it. It was also the display. And Marvin Minsky had written a little program that put some dots on the display and ran them around, but it didn't do very much, and you twiddled on the switches looking for different starting values to get an interesting pattern. But most of them didn't work very well. So it didn't have good play, what we call now good play value. And I thought that it would be possible to do a much better demonstration of what you could do with a display. And at the time, the space race was very much in the news. And I realized that people didn't know how spaceships maneuvered, really. You know, they sort of thought of them in terms of airplanes or something. And so I started talking up doing a space simulator of some kind. And eventually, we figured out that we could have a couple of spaceships and arm them with torpedoes, which could shoot down other torpedoes and spaceships, so they were a sort of universal weapon, and simple. And I kept talking this up, and eventually Alan went out on an expedition to Maynard and came back with the sine and cosine routines and sort of plopped them down in front of me and said, "All right, Russell, here's the sine and cosine routines. Now what's your excuse?" And so I actually had to sit down and do some thinking. And I wrote up a program that did the two spaceships, but it didn't have any gravity and didn't have any stars. And we played that for a while. It was kind of interesting. And then Peter wrote Expensive Planetarium, another one of those expensive programs. A planetarium in 2 pages, plus the star charts, 2 pages of code. So that got incorporated in. And then Dan Edwards looked at it and took the outline interpreter that I had written and took the same outline description, but compiled custom code for which displayed the spaceship outlines exactly as fast as the display could display them. And that gave him enough time to calculate 2 extra square roots to calculate the influence of gravity on the spaceships. Now, this gave us a problem because the torpedoes, there wasn't time to calculate the influence of gravity on the torpedoes. So we introduced another piece of technology, which was they were photon bombs, and they weren't affected by gravity. And then it turned out that especially beginning players had a lot of problems with getting trapped in clouds of torpedoes and blowing up. So we decided that we would rush from the development labs the hyperspace. So if you said rotate left and rotate right at the same time, your spaceship disappeared, which got you out of the storm of torpedoes, and then it reappeared somewhere else randomly with random velocity. But it turned out that made it too easy to escape, so we realized that the laboratories hadn't really finished the development of the hyperfield generators, and they were unreliable. In fact, the probability of blowing up when you came out of hyperspace was about 1/8. And in fact, nobody ever survived more than 7, trips through hyperspace. And that got done in the spring of '62, and that's essentially what you have down, what you can see downstairs. And for about 2 years, it was the world's most popular computer game, because it was the only one. And the other note I have is why it was easy to do space war. Here's a PDP-1 manual, all 70-some pages of it. For the chips I'm working on now, which are single-chip computers, cost a few dollars a chip, that go into your car in mobs, 1,500 pages of manual. Don't read it all in one sitting.
Thank you. What's interesting to me is this was really the beginning of video games, which are a big thing in the world today for sure. But was that Steve, had the whole idea, I mean, not every aspect of it, but had the idea, talked about it, ended up doing it, and it was a terrific thing. So, Peter, you want to go next?
Is this Mike? Thank you. I'm Peter Sampson. The PDP-1 changed a lot of lives. Mine was one of them. We've seen some of how the PDP-1 had successor computers. The whole DEC line basically grew from it. We've seen how some of the software on the PDP-1 was pioneering. We'll talk a little more about that, particularly as I happen to see it. I wrote Expensive Planetarium. Reason the stars had to be right. This was just an engineering point of view. You don't necessarily hear that in consumer software these days. We just worked until it was right. And I do say we, as I think Steve made very clear. This was what's now called open source, what's now called collaborative development. It's called agile programming. The Emperor's new clothes are really vintage. One program Ellen and I worked on was called T-Square. This was, so far as I've been able to find out, the first electronic drafting program. You ran a cursor around the screen, and what did we use to drive the cursor? The space war controls. A little repurposing of the entertainment into some serious business. But we indeed drew some real schematics with that. And one of the curious things is how your experience on the PDP-1 carried over into the rest of your life. Major part of my career, working at a small company here in San Francisco, was developing an electronic drafting system. 80,000 lines of code, all based on early experience. Another program I wrote was called TJ2. TJ stood for Type Justifier. This would take English language tape, for instance, with a few special characters and flags in it, and would justify it. You could have codes for indents, margins, double spacing, page breaks. It was a first page layout program. Ancestor, things like TROF, NROF. Later on at Bell Labs, but this was in the 1960s. All these things just spread out from the TX0 and then the PDP-1. Amazing machine. I programmed a card game. Nowadays, you play a lot of solitaire on computers. This was a game, the computer played itself. It was both sides. And this was a game of war, which you may recall from your childhood, is once the deck is shuffled, it's a deterministic game. But my question was, does either side, first player or second player, actually have an advantage? So it would sit there for hours at a time, playing war and racking up the score. And the answer is no. You can sleep well tonight because war is a fair game. Now, I want to talk mostly about music. Jack Dennis on the TX0 had got me interested in the idea of using a computer to synthesize music in real time. Not to play it back, but to actually compute the waveforms. In real time, on a machine the speed of the PDP-1, this is a pretty horrendous thing. All you're going to get out is square waves. But with clever programming, you can get out more than one square wave, and I managed to get four. Four simultaneous square waves, wrote a compiler so that you could type in your music in a sort of English language. It would compile it. Woe to you if you made a mistake. The typewriter would switch to red ribbon and say, to err is human, to forgive divine. No, they didn't want that. Least of all the red ribbon. But you could code up individual pieces of music, and people flocked to this. Their own favorite popular songs, their own favorite classical composers, their own Christmas carols, all got coded up. Tremendous amount of music got written this way. Now, we skip ahead a few years. I was working at this company in San Francisco called Systems Concepts, and I had the idea of making a music synthesizer that was really going to be capable, not just square waves. Ended up with a design for about 2,500 ICs worth of machine. And at just that moment, the computer music group at Stanford came up to Systems Conference and said, we were thinking somebody ought to make a music synthesizer, roughly like this. So we compared our plans, and by not entirely coincidence, they were almost identical. And who was the technical head of that effort? The professor was John Chowning. The technical head was a man named Andy Moorer at Stanford. And I discovered that he had gotten into computer music because he heard the PDP-1. So things come around in strange ways. Stanford, we built that machine. Proud to say it ran Stanford's primary synthesis machine for more than 10 years. Well, move ahead again to 2 years ago. I get involved in this museum. Discover they have a PDP-1 restoration project. Wander in there one evening and discover this box. Now, do we have we got my slide? The Peters Mystery Box slide, is that there it is. Walked into the museum and found this box with this note on it. This was a box full of music tapes from MIT, which I hadn't seen in 40 years. Waiting for me here at the museum. And as you see, it says, guard this with your life. And it could be argued that I didn't. Or, since we're together again, it could be argued that I did. Now, the trouble was we had a lot of music data tapes. We didn't have the player. So I spent some time at home tearing these tapes apart, logically speaking, bit by bit, figuring out the music format that I hadn't used in decades, and then writing a player around it so that once again the PDP-1 could play these tapes. You heard a sample of that this evening with that little video, and if you go down to the PDP-1 demo, you'll hear some more. The story has a postscript. Some of you may have heard the name of George Michael, grand old man at Lawrence Livermore Labs. And Livermore is well known for having had one computer of every kind ever made by anyone anywhere in the universe. And indeed, they had a PDP-1. They had several. George Michael donated his personal memorabilia to this museum a few months ago. And looking through it, they discovered at the bottom of all this big computer stuff, a little box of PDP-1 memorabilia, including, of all things, a letter to George Michael from me, dated 1963, which I said, Dear George, here are some music tapes you were interested in. And the music tapes were there, and this is one of them. And it played the first time here.
Thank you, Peter.
I really think that having to reverse engineer your own stuff 40 years later makes the punishment fit the crime.
Next is John McCarthy. I have to say a couple of things here. It's been a fascinating thing for me to have met John McCarthy and to know him for all these years because he's told me about the future. And that future either comes true or John gets involved in making it come true on occasion. And that was certainly the case with the idea all of us who ever had to use batch processing, realized there had to be a way around it. And John invented this idea called time sharing, and he came and consulted at BBN. We had lots of time to talk. When he explained this idea to me, I agreed that it was exactly correct. It's never been done the way John actually anticipated or planned. So you've all suffered as a consequence. But anyway, I hit upon the idea of a way to make a computer pretend it was doing what John had in mind. And the reason to do this was because many people thought time sharing was a terrible idea. It couldn't work. You had two people on the same computer, nothing but bad things would happen, and so on. What we had in mind was to do a demonstration, and I came up with this idea, which I think, in my mind, caused enormous mischief because it did work, and people copied the bad idea, which was pretending it was doing John's method, instead of doing what John had in mind in the first place. This is my view of it. John may have a different view. I don't know.
Sorry, what's the bad idea?
The bad idea was to use a swapping drum instead of having everyone in RAM. I thought so. Okay, here, use mine.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about time sharing on the PDP-1. First, I want to make a general remark about the situation there, where Ed could talk to Ben Gurley and get Ben Gurley to make modifications in the design of the PDP-1. And I was astonished that that could be done because I had had some experience with IBM. But even it proved possible to do it with IBM, although I was too shy. Herb Teeger was the guy who persuaded IBM to make it possible to address more than 32,000 words of memory. But I was astonished that after Ed left in order to escape the impending nuclear war, Ben Gurley would even listen to me. And DEC had come up with two schemes for addressing more than 4,000 words of memory, and I didn't like either of them. And he actually adopted mine, which was to use indirect addressing. I was astonished. Okay, and of course, why was this possible? And this was basically possible because of the small number of people involved in all of these things. At that time, and also the small number of computers. Namely, BBN was the first customer. Now, I later did some consulting for IBM in the 90s and came out with an idea about specializing a laptop for scientists and engineers. I said thousands of scientists and engineers would be interested in getting such a specialized laptop. And the guy said to me, "We can't sell anything unless it will sell 1 million." That's part of the change, and it's not only, and of course it's affected lots of people. Now I want to come back to time sharing on the PDP-1. My original idea involving as to implementing time sharing. Okay, so what's time sharing basically? The computer has to have an interrupt system, and it will be interrupted every so often, like every 30 milliseconds. When it's running a program for one user, and it could switch to another user. It would also be interrupted when characters appeared or other input-output events occurred. And IBM invented an interrupt system for the IBM 704 on behalf of Boeing, which was interested in controlling wind tunnels. And I grumbled to, Ed was the first person to propose doing time sharing on the PDP-1, and I said it needs an interrupt system. And he said, all right, I'll design one. I said, well, it needs memory bounds, and he thought of this idea of giving 4,000 words at a time, and cooked up this marvelous drum. Let's see, what other features did, well, that's the interrupt. Yeah. But there was something else that I was thinking of that you got Ben to put in that I, what? No, he didn't. The PDP-6 had them, but not the PDP-1. Okay, so anyway, this turned out to be entirely feasible. Now, 5 PDP-1 time sharings were actually built. 2 at BBN. The first, I think, was the first time sharing system to actually get operating. Maybe Corbetteau's thing on the 7090, but which wasn't put into operation. It may have been about the same time. This was actually working when I left MIT for Stanford in the fall of '62. It was already got working. The guy who did the programming was Sheldon Boylan. Okay, and so this was basically a demonstration of doing it. It was supported by National Institutes of Health. Jordan Bruch was really good at getting money from National Institutes of Health. Then I think the Jack Dennis time-sharing system probably started just a little bit later because MIT got its PDP-1 a little later than BBN did. Then there was, when I came to Stanford, then I got to do a really fancy time-sharing system for the PDP-1, which was display-based, and it was really nailing the flag to the mast in one respect, is we were, in fact, short of money, so one of the things that I decided is there will be no external way of preparing input to the machine. We will not buy even one flexowriter. All input on the machine will be prepared on the machine itself. And the other thing were these 12 Philco displays. And again, that was this area by the 1964 or thereabouts. Namely, the Philco company was eager to build these displays to our specification. It wasn't a case of, you know, where can we sell thousands of displays. Naturally, they hoped they'd sell more, but they didn't sell any more of that particular model. They were pretty lousy.
It was like a doctor's handprinting. You could read it after you had enough experience.
Yes, but I never got that experience. I think I was already too old. Namely, I'm not one of these people that had acquaintance with computers as a teenager. There weren't any. But yeah, I want to mention one other thing, and that has to do with personal computers. TX0 and TX2 were, I would say, the first personal computers. Now, what you had to do, TX2, which was a 36-bit machine and was a $500,000 personal computer, and so what you had to do was to say, what I want to do is important enough to let me to use this $500,000 machine as a personal computer. Well, only very few people got to do that. But the truth is that when time sharing was implemented, there on not so much on the PDP-1, but it seems to me when MIT started implementing on the PDP-6, then there were people that were absolutely outraged that they couldn't any longer sign up for hours at a time of exclusive use of the computer. Now what happens is, all right, so computers are so cheap that you can have your own, and the people that first designed them, the personal computer when IBM, didn't put a decent system for memory protection, or and I suppose it had interrupts, I'm not sure.
Yes, it did.
But it was only later that they discovered that they that the various computer manufacturers, that they had to reverse engineer that. And I'm not sure that the software has yet entirely caught up with time sharing.
I second that. I believe that Windows is detectably slower than the PDP-6 at switching users.
Well, one of the features of at least earlier versions of Windows, I don't know whether it's true now, is that different applications can end up wanting to use the same memory.
They've sort of fixed that, but the display drivers are so complicated that you hardly notice.
Okay, but here we're talking about ideas that were prevalent in 1958 that were dropped when the PC came along because you don't need all that complication if it's a single user computer. Well, they turn out that, well, the single user wants to have various of his own programs time sharing with each other, and that introduces essentially all of the complications that are involved when you have multiple humans time sharing with each other. In fact, maybe it's worse because the humans at least could possibly be polite to each other, whereas these computer programs cannot. I think maybe that's all I want to say. I'm sorry, I do have a little bit more to say. BBN had a second time-sharing project. They never used the first time-sharing system for the basic reason they had so few people that there was no problem with people signing up for hours at a time. But they did a second one, which was installed in Massachusetts General Hospital. And what it promised to do is things that are barely done in medical computing today. I wasn't there to hear the debris, but it was unsuccessful, an attempt to use a PDP-1 and to train all the people to use it and to use these things. It was really an incredibly overambitious project. So now there was this. So there was the Stanford one, which I bragged about a bit, was triggered by DEC giving Stanford a PDP-1, but a small one, and then Pat Suppies and I getting the money to fatten it up to make a big time-sharing system. Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Just a funny anecdote. The money for this first time-sharing system came from the National Institutes of Health, and they had a deadline on the proposal. We were writing it like crazy, and we weren't going to make it, so we made a battle plan. I rushed out to find it had to be postmarked by a given date, to find a mailbox that was picked up as late as possible the next day. So that was step one. Step two, we had a Pitney Bowes postage meter, so we figured we'll just stick that on with the date and so on and so forth. So at about 5 a.m., we're done, and we put the postage on, and the secretary had advanced the date that night when she left. Well, you couldn't just set it back. It was diabolical. I had to take the machine apart and get it to say the previous date. We stuck the thing on, sent it off, and got the money to do time sharing. So that's how computer science makes progress. You know.
Well, I was spared knowledge of that.
It's an amazing thing being there at the beginning, and to me the most interesting aspect of all of this was we saw the future. There's no two ways about it. It wasn't that I just came upon it myself. It was the PDP-1 made it possible. John saw ways to make hardware that would make this more possible. People who used it realized right away what a wonderful thing it was. But the interesting thing to me is there was a lot of opposition. All kinds of people said, no, this isn't the way you use computers. Computers are very expensive. You submit a run, and you'll find out about it the next day. And if you're a careful programmer, there won't be any mistakes, and so on and so forth, You'd submit a big batch, and on those days, Fortran was very funny. It would come out and say, you had a comma where you needed a right parenthesis. Well, it stopped there. It didn't bother telling you about the rest of the things you did wrong. That was for the next run, the next day, but nevertheless, all kinds of people were opposed to this. They thought everything we were doing was nuts. I remember someone, when we displayed the expensive typewriter, first word processor to someone, they said, you're taking this $1 million facility and turning it into a typewriter. Is that supposed to be smart? Okay. Or we were talking about AI, which we haven't gotten to yet, but this one person from some funding agency says, if I understand this right, you want millions and millions of dollars, the biggest computers in the world, and then we're going to get another person we can hire at minimum wage, Anyway, the point is that you can have the vision, but that doesn't mean the world, and you could be right, but it doesn't mean the world's going to just happily accept it. Sometimes you got to struggle a long, long time. And the point about the PDP-1 was it was a big accelerator. It pushed us into new ideas, made things happen. We were able to use it. It was just a really dramatic event, and it made the world a better place for all us computer hackers. No two ways about it.
Ed, shall we? Let me add a much later example of such kind of the thinking that Ed is deploring. In 1975, we started the low overhead time sharing system at Stanford, and one of the users, for students to use, and the Dean of Engineering announced a decree that this computer may not be used for writing papers. It may be used for writing programs, but not papers. So he didn't think that writing papers on a computer was a good thing.
Wow.
Ed, I know we're running a little bit late, but perhaps we can take one or two questions from the audience. If you come up to the microphones. And before we start, let me remind you that the visible storage will be open until 10 o'clock, and we can take 15 people for a 10-minute run and see what the PDP-1 is. So if you line up outside the door, and if you can't make it tonight, remember, beginning this Saturday at 2 p.m., we're going to do demonstrations on the first and third Saturday of every month. Yes?
Yeah, just a quick question.
Don.
Do people have any source code from those days?
Yes. We have the source code for Space War.
For Space War, for the display hacks, we have assembled some of these on the PDP-1 to demonstrate that the old development tools can still be used.
Yes, sir.
Yes, a quick anecdote on visions of the future. In about 1966, 67, I was at SRI International, or Stanford Research Institute, and somebody had come in, I think it was American Express, had provided SRI with some seed money for venture capital to sponsor a few man-months of effort on a few selected projects that the staff would come up with and see what might be promising for the future. And I wrote up a one-page proposal saying, look, there's this space war game that the people at MIT find fascinating, and it runs on the PDP-1 and is pretty stable, and there's a time-sharing system on the PDP-1. If we dedicated a PDP-1 to just run space war time-shared, we could get maybe 3 or 4 users and put that in a bowling alley or a shopping center and sell time on it. And, of course, the management at SRI said, that's frivolous, we won't consider anything like that.
Any other good stories from the panelists on that one? Yes, sir.
This question is for Alan Kotak. Alan, about over 20 years ago, you were on a panel that I organized for the 20th anniversary of 36-bit machines, and you talked about a PDP-1 program that hasn't been yet mentioned tonight, but which is the direct ancestor of one of today's most popular text editors, Emacs. Of course, I'm referring to TICO, and I was wondering if you might recall any of the old stories relating to TICO from PDP-1 days.
Well, thank you. What I guess I first remember is that Dan Murphy, who was working, was it Dan? Yeah. Dan was working on a PDP-1 that was upstairs from the one that I described. It was in the physics department. Martin Deutsch, Professor Martin Deutsch, had it, and he developed this text editing thing, which terseness was the word. The commands for expensive typewriter, as again I don't remember the details, but they were fairly verbose, and TICO became not just a convenient online text editor, but it also allowed you to write procedural macros, as they were called, and at least one thing I remember was, maybe this was not on the PDP-1, it may have been by the PDP-6 time, but I wrote a Lisp interpreter in TICO macros. So, but yes, it came along maybe probably not in the first year. Maybe it was 62. So, yeah. I hear that if anyone has a copy of PDP-1 TICO, the museum really needs it.
You bet. And anything along that line. Yes.
I have an interest in music synthesis, and I'm wondering if it would be possible to have some of these music tapes that you have played on the PDP-8 and put into some sort of audio format to be put online.
Well, PDP-1.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we are beginning to do that. Thank you.
There's ways to do that. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yes, this is a specific question for Alan Kotak. You related the story of the simulated chess program. Yeah. And in view of all the other historical firsts that have been mentioned, would it be fair to state that your transmission of Run For It to your co-conspirators was the first example of a networked escape sequence?
Well, good line.
No rebuttal, Alan.
I'm John Green. John McCarthy said that there were 5 time-sharing systems for the PDP-1, which is pretty amazing if there's only 50 PDP-1s built, that 5 different users did it. And the 5th one that you didn't mention, I believe, was from the Rand Corporation. And Ricky Greenblatt once told me that Corbato's thing and one of the BB&N ones and the Rand Corporation all came to life at approximately the same time.
Great. Thank you, John. Last question.
Well, my name is Leo Brookes. The question is for Harlan Anderson. So you mentioned that the list price of PDP-1 with 4K memory was $120,000. So what was the cost of goods?
How much gross profit was there in that?
Is
that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Well, it's so long ago that I'm willing to tell you now.
That's why I'm asking.
There's a little story related to that, which I told to some of the other panelists earlier this evening. The incremental cost, I don't know how good you are at cost accounting, but to make one more would be $40,000. But that didn't include any part of the development cost or any of that kind of thing. So now when we gave this computer to MIT, the tax laws at the time allowed us to deduct from our income, because we were very profitable at that time, $120,000. But our cash cost to make it for these guys was $40,000. Now, if you assume that the income tax rate was 50%, it meant that we reduced our taxes for the year by $60,000, and we had put out $40,000, so we had a net positive cash flow of $20,000.
Generosity was rewarded.
It was a good deal
at
for
that
all of us.
time, IBM had a then secret internal formula for their own pricing. They had more than 80% of the world market for computers, and their rule was the same, using the same incremental manufacturing, which was this: the rental, they like to rent them, was 1/7 of the incremental manufacturing cost per month. And the sale price was 7 times, they like the number 7 times the incremental manufacturing cost. So DEC was actually, selling it wholesale.
Well, on behalf of the trustees, the staff, and everyone here this evening, thank you so much, panelists. It was a wonderful evening, very enlightening, terrific pioneers. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for attending this evening, and thank you, PDP-1 team, for doing a wonderful job.